Hey, Bulldogs. So we're coming upon the end of this first unit that began before the English colonies in the Americas and then the beginning of the English colonies in the Americas. We focused a little bit about Jamestown and then the New England colonies and the middle colonies. But now I want to focus beyond Jamestown and encompass the Southern colonies, which are often referred to as the Chesapeake colonies and the lower Southern colonies, which I'll get to at the end. But first, a quick overview of what we've learned a little bit already, that the Southern colonies had an agricultural economy. They grew things like tobacco, rice, indigo, and other cash crops. And this agricultural economy produced a slave economy. It was really mostly indentured servitude, indentured servants with some slaves until about the very late 1600s. But by 1700, there were already 20,000 slaves in the Americas, and that number continued to grow. So let's look at Virginia. We've already learned about Jamestown in 1607. And remember, even after the starving time, where only 60 of the first 400 colonists survived, it continued to be a very dangerous time. Famine, disease, conflict, all sorts of things. And by 1625, only 1,200 of the first 8,000 colonists actually survived. Also keep in mind that Virginia was like much larger than what we think of as Virginia today. It was that, all this land that was claimed at that time. Maryland, we learned a little bit about this on our geography game, that it was created in 1632 by Lord Baltimore. And he had a land grant to use Maryland as a refuge for English Roman Catholics. I don't know what Toman Catholics are, but for Roman Catholics. A little side note, today, Roman Catholics still make up about 20% of the population of Maryland. So the first settlers arrived there in 1634. And, remember what we learned about your freshman year in world history, that the Protestant Reformation was becoming like a thing in Europe, and King Henry started the Reformation in England when he wanted a divorce, remember? So he broke away from the Pope and started the Church of England. So people that wanted to still be Catholic, it was a bit of a problem. Yes. That's okay. Do you have a question? No. Okay. Sorry. So the Toleration Act of 1649 came about because, just like in Europe, Protestants started coming to Maryland, and those same tensions between the religious groups were causing problems. So this Toleration Act said, you had to have religious toleration legally for all Christian denominations. You could not tax one group more. You could not mandate them become something else. You could not forbid them from going to a certain church service. But keep in mind, it's still only of Christian denominations. Maryland was similar to Virginia in that people that went there often suffered from famine and disease in those early years. So here's some numbers for you. During this time, half of everyone born in Virginia and Maryland did not live past the age of 20. So like 50% of you would be, having your final years right now, which is awful. In fact, less than 20% of all males even made it to age 50. And for women, it was even worse. Only half made it to age 40. Okay, so just think, it wasn't going to be like easy just to start a new life in the Americas at this time. The Carolinas in 1663 were created from land grants that were given to 8 lords by King Charles II of England. In 1670, the city of Charleston was formed, and that became the most active seaport in the South. By 1712, they split into North and South Carolina. It was really hard to govern a large area at that time when there was so much space between settlements, and that's why they did so. So North Carolina was very rural. A lot of farmers from Virginia came there. In 1712, North Carolina was mostly a refuge for poor whites from what became, the part that was South Carolina, and also religious dissenters from there and from Virginia. They also sold many indigenous people into slavery here to help make more farms. South Carolina, think of this as the land of big plantations. This was the only colony where slaves outnumbered white colonists. So if you look at these pie charts here, you'll see that 60% of the population of South Carolina were actually slaves. And also, keep in mind that later we'll learn that South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union. So where does that thread of slavery in South Carolina, like all these cause and effects? Georgia, this was a colony for poor jailed debtors. So back then, you could literally go to prison for having debt. So imagine if everyone who couldn't pay off their credit card debt during this coronavirus went to jail, right? There wouldn't be enough jails. It was formerly part of South Carolina. This was also considered to be a buffer between Spanish Florida to the south and the other English colonies to the north. So let's take these people that don't put them in jail, but make them the people that stand between us and the Spanish. So this is an image of surveying land to be used for farms. Now, Savannah was formed in 1733. It was a diverse city by those standards at the time because it had German Lutherans and Scottish Protestant Highlanders, which now would not be considered by diverse, but at that time would be. So we learned that Georgia banned slavery for a long time, and people asked, well, why was this? Was it just because they were abolitionists? And unfortunately, it's not just because they were generous. It's because they wanted these debtors who were coming from England to be successful. And they didn't want them having big plantations, but they wanted small farm success. So having slaves would not really allow that to happen. So think of this deal here. If you owed money in England, now you have to also keep in mind how deadly it was in the Americas. We already gave you some of those numbers, but they would send you free passage to Georgia. They would give you free land, free food for a while, even free cattle, until you were able to provide for yourself. So if you had slaves, that wouldn't, help produce small farms. So this was the situation. And it was successful. So much, in fact, that by 752, they were able to change and give up their charter and become a royal colony. And then many of the farmers there started things like rice plantations, which then they stopped the ban on slavery, and slavery rapidly increased. So think of the hypocrisy or the irony of, some people who were previously in jail literally getting free land to go work and then become successful, to then forcing slavery upon people, right, to help make money for them. So before we leave, I said I would say this in the beginning. Note the different colonies here. The yellow is the New England colonies we learned about. The pink is the middle colonies that we learned about. And then what we did today was the Southern colonies. And, being in Virginia was much different than being in Savannah, Georgia. So notice you have the lower Southern colonies and then the Chesapeake colonies, like around the Chesapeake Bay, being Maryland and Virginia. I also want to show you one more chart because we've gone over this in a few different forms for this unit on the different colonial exports. So this covers sort of all the colonies. So keep in mind, tobacco was mostly from, say, Virginia. Wheat was often from the middle colonies, say Pennsylvania. And things like fish and whale, well, fish could come sort of from most of the colonies, but whale oil was primarily from Massachusetts and other New England colonies. So this is tying into your last video on mercantilism, some of those exports that the British were profiteering from. All right, any questions, let me know. Hope you guys are doing well and see you next class. All right, stay safe, be well.